Anime has always been a huge part of my life. When I was a kid, I remember coming home from school and sitting in front of our huge boxy TV, going straight to Kicks. Anybody remember Kicks? And watching Dragon Ball Z for an hour. I remember how I used to beg my mum to walk faster as she was walking me back from school so that I could maybe catch the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. Back then, like many others my age, growing up in the early 2000s, I had no idea what anime actually was. I just knew it looked slightly different to other cartoons like Tom and Jerry or SpongeBob. But I think that was what intrigued me at first, how different these special cartoons, as I used to call them, looked. It wasn't until I was around 10 when I saw my uncle watching Naruto Shippuden that I got introduced to what anime really was. And in that moment my life, and I mean this literally, completely changed. I started off by watching Naruto and Bleach, and I loved these stories deeply. They changed how I look at both life and how I look at myself. And as cringy as that sounds, it's the truth. It's how anime changed me. And I remember when I started secondary school, I first learned how the general public perceived anime. I was told not to tell people that I watched anime because it would make me seem like a loser or a weirdo. But slowly but surely that type of thinking changed. Now anime is one of the biggest and most profitable sectors of the entertainment market there is. Although the big three did originally bring manga and anime to the West, it was only the last decade where anime has really exploded into mainstream media as a whole. And that's mostly down to manga and anime feeling more grown up. Yes, there are still some goofy and childish animes out there, but nowadays most popular anime tend to cover more adult themes, especially in shounen anime, which originally was meant to be made for young to teenage boys, but now everyone of all ages, of all genders, watches shounen. But to me, in my opinion, there seems to be this growing trend in modern anime, which has left me with an unsatisfactory taste in my mouth. And that's the feeling of an unsatisfying ending. Now, to quickly preface, I will be covering Dr. Stone, Demon Slayer, and Jujutsu Kaisen, so there will be spoilers, so this is the warning. So if you haven't caught up with them, then I suggest clicking off and going and reading them. But what inspired me to make this video was how much I loved these stories at the beginning and how disappointed I was at the end. Now, most people, will say, they didn't have a bad ending, you're just being too critical. Yes, I am being critical because, as I mentioned, anime is such a big part of my life. So to see some of my favourite series that I have been reading for years end with a whimper. So, let's begin to dive into what I believe is one of the biggest problems in modern shounen, the unsatisfactory ending. One day, all of humanity turned to stone. Nature reclaimed the planet as humans slumbered in their new stone form. 3,700 years later, 16-year-old Senku Ishigami woke up and declared that he would rebuild civilization and revive all of humanity. That is the basic synopsis of Dr. Stone, a story all about one thing: science. Now, this anime has a special place in my heart because the one thing I love as much as I love anime, it's science. I've always loved science, just as long as I've loved anime. And to have a show combine two of my favourite things was a surefire way to my heart. The story had a solid foundation and a great main character in Senku. The supporting cast also made this a great story. In addition to this, although the world is fantastical in nature, the science is all true and grounded in reality, thus making it a hard sci-fi.
Hi, Robo Rahim here to explain what a hard sci-fi is. For those who don't know, a hard sci-fi is a sci-fi story that is characterized by its rigorous scientific accuracy and logic, meaning the science performed in the story is accurate to real life, and not just some Star Trek mumbo-jumbo.
The show is educational to some degree, explaining many scientific properties such as how to generate electricity, magnetism, and metallurgy to a high degree without overcomplicating it. And I think that's what drew me in at first, was how well they explained the science. I mean, I knew what everything was, but for them to explain it in such a simple way was brilliant. And this is down to the manga artist Bochi having a degree in physics and the scientific advisor Karare making sure the science in the show was realistic. This just made me love the story even more, knowing how much effort the whole team put into it to make it as good as they could. It was a passion project. From the start of the show, minus the petrification beam, I love how they started off simple, with making clothes, shelter, fire, bars of soap, and alloys, all of which are consistent with how they did things back in the Bronze Age and Iron Age. However, as the story began its first big scientific journey with the creation of the sulfur drug, the miracle cure-all drugs, this is where the real science began. Now, there's plenty more that happens, but as much as I can talk about all the great things that happen, I'm here to talk about the ending. From chapter 139, we enter what's known as the Truth of Petrification saga, the final saga, which consists of the 5 final arcs, going up to chapter 231. That's only 92 chapters to complete the final saga. To put this into perspective, the first 138 chapters had 9 arcs, but some of these arcs, such as the Versus Hyoga and the Village Origin arcs, are less than 10 chapters and focus on a fight or a flashback. Many people can agree the ending of a show can either make or break said show. Take Game of Thrones as an example, a widely popular show that was completely besmirched by its ending. On the other hand, you have a show like Breaking Bad, whose ending only amplified how good the show is. So sticking the landing with the ending is one of the most important parts of writing a story. And in my opinion, Dr. Stone did not have an ending that matched its brilliance in the beginning. My biggest gripe with the show is, without a shadow of doubt, the last 2 arcs, the Globetrotting arc and the Moon Mission arc. Throughout the story, the mangaka Ryuichiro Inagaki made sure to explain science to a great detail, laying out a map which was followed to a T. But in the last 2 arcs, it seems so incredibly rushed, with them in 32 chapters making a computer that was comparable to the one that they used at NASA in the 60s, and a bloody rocket ship that could go to the moon. Mind you, it took them 28 chapters to make the sulfur drug. So this is my major problem with the story. The ending was just so rushed. It could be explained narratively with they now had more people and a larger communications array so they could work 1,000 times faster, 1,000,000 times faster. And I'm sure they could. But that's not the issue I have. The issue lies with the idea that these scientific miracles, like building a rocket, were just brushed over. The care and detailed explanations that were there in the beginning were now gone. And I know what people will say, you can't expect them to explain literal rocket science to a general audience. And I'm not saying they should. All I'm saying is, the amount of effort that they put into the science in the beginning seemed to diminish as the series went on, which is what caused me to dislike the ending and almost ruin the story. But what saved it was the general wonder and amazement of the narrative, how they explore science. And I think if it wasn't for my love of science, I would have ended up hating the ending more than I already dislike it now. But the ending still captivates the beauty and brilliance of science. Even though they didn't go through every little detail, I still love Dr. Stone. I just wish it had a better ending. The night is ruled by demons. They feed on humans and are unable to be stopped by regular people. However, in this world, there are people who protect the weak, the demon slayers. The story follows Tanjiro Kamado, a boy whose family is slain by a demon, and his sister, Nezuko, is turned into one. He wishes for 2 things: to find the demon that killed his family, and to save his sister and revert her back into a human. Now, most of you have probably heard about Demon Slayer, and if you haven't, then you're either criminally offline or just don't watch anime. Demon Slayer started its manga run in February 2016 and ended in May 2020. And during those short 4 years, it became the biggest and highest selling manga for those years. There were many things that helped its run. The story, although basic, had a lot of ideas that people enjoyed, such as a revenge story, a hierarchy of power, and a new power system. But the biggest draw was undoubtedly the anime, which started in April 2019 and was produced by Ufotable, a studio known for its breathtaking animation, as seen in shows such as Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works and Karana Kyokai. But the explosion of Demon Slayer truly came after the airing of episode 19, an episode so good just by saying that people know exactly what I'm talking about. This episode spread like wildfire and broke the internet. The animation, which was already impeccable, seemed to have stepped up another 10 levels, and we were left with one of the most beautifully animated fights of all time. There was also a little bit of luck with Demon Slayer, as only a few months after the episode aired, the world was slowed to a halt by COVID. So, with everyone trapped indoors, they looked for something to do. And what anime was being spoken about the most at this time? That's right, Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer now had a huge wave of hype behind it, and people could not get enough of it, which all culminated in it selling millions of copies worldwide and becoming the sensation it is today. Now, I became a fan of the anime because the story, the characters, and the power system was simple and clean. This doesn't mean it was boring, just sometimes you want to get invested into a story where you don't need to have a PhD to understand the power system. And the main characters, although stereotypical shounen characters, were all lovable and shine in their own ways. But my issue with how Demon Slayer was handled lies with not its story, like with Dr. Stone, but with the characters, especially the villains. The Upper Moons, aka the Big Bad Enemy Group, were the final enemies in the penultimate arc of the story, the Infinity Castle arc, and are under the leadership of the big bad evil guy himself, Muzan, who is the main antagonist of the final arc, the Sunrise Countdown arc. Now, what was wrong with these villains, you may ask? Well, let's tackle the Upper Moons that were in the Infinity Castle. Firstly, let's go over the only exception, the Upper Moon 3, Akaza, who I thought was a well-written character with a properly fleshed out background, and most importantly, there was a history between the main character and Akaza. This made the fight between Akaza versus Tanjiro and Gyu gripping and have actual meaning. Now let's move on to the bad. Kaigaku versus Zenitsu. Now, my issue isn't with Zenitsu. Without him, this fight would have been straight ass. But in my opinion, this fight felt like they needed to give Zenitsu a reason to fight someone with a connection. But unlike the relationship between Tanjiro and Akaza, the relationship between Kaigaku and Zenitsu felt rushed and shoehorned in, which completely ruined the fight for me. Instead, if this feud was built up over several volumes, I believe this would have made the payoff of this fight far better. Now, Doma versus Shinobu, Kanao, and Inosuke. Another fight in which my problem was not with our protagonist, but with the villain. Doma was shown to be this incredibly evil and despicable villain, but throughout the fight, I didn't see enough of this. Now, if they made Doma fight in this underhanded way, trying to cheat his way to a victory using everything at his disposal to win, really showing off his treacherousness, that would have made the fight a lot better in my opinion. But unfortunately, they gave him a weak backstory, and the fight itself was a bit lame because poison user, like who likes poison users? Now, Nakame versus Iguro, Mitsuri, and Yushiro. I don't have a lot to say about this fight because Nakame had little to do in the story except to use her blood demon art and summon the Infinity Castle. She was such a nothing character, and this fight just felt flat and lifeless. It was almost as if the writer was like,
okay, I got main characters and villains fighting now. I got these guys left. What the hell do I do with them? I'll just make them fight each other. Yep, that's the good stuff.
These characters were just the rest and were left to their own devices, which sucks because they all had great potential. Now, finally, the most disappointing fight in the arc. Kokushibo versus Muichiro, Genya, Sanami, and Gyome. If there was a character that had hype behind them, then it's Kokushibo. When I first read the chapter when he was introduced, I was like, yeah, this guy's gonna be amazing. Only for him to lose 2 fights and then die. Like, the fight itself was decent, but Kokushibo was such a letdown. All of his aura that he built up vanished, and we were left with such a nothing villain. His backstory was tame and nothing new, but at least his character design was amazing. Now, to the man with absolutely zero aura, as much as Ufotable tried to give him some. Muzan is the biggest letdown of a villain I've ever seen. When you think of final villains of anime and manga, you think of characters like Madara, Aizen, Johan, and Kira. These characters all have shared traits, an extremely strong reason to fight, and they live up to their hype. They show off their skills and why they deserve to be final villains. Think of Madara versus the Allied Shinobi Force or Aizen versus the Gotei 13. These aren't just fights to show you how powerful the villains are, but serve to show the audience that they will stop at nothing to get their ideals realized. Muzan has 2 fights. He runs away from the first and loses the second. 2 fights! That's all we get, with a few scenes and panels here and there. There's nothing that makes me think that Muzan deserves to be the final villain. He doesn't strike me with fear or give me a sense of impending doom when he's shown. The best villains, in my opinion, should do 2 things to a reader. 1. Show the reader that they are an antagonistic force, and 2. That their ideals are just as strong as the protagonists. Muzan fails at both. Once I learned that sun breathing was the technique that could kill him, and that Tanjiro could use sun breathing, I instinctively knew that the final fight would be bad, ruining the first point. And secondly, I never once thought to myself that Muzan's ideals were as strong as the heroes. We never got to see enough of him to really learn about what makes him tick. I know you were meant to show, not tell, but we were shown nothing until right at the end. A good villain has roots throughout the whole story, and the character should feel like they're about to undertake an insurmountable task. But with Muzan, never gave me that feeling, especially after the Hashira training arc. All in all, I just felt as though Muzan was horribly handled and left no impact on me. There are some villains who will be forever remembered as the greats, and unfortunately, Muzan is not one of them. Demon Slayer is incredibly popular, and I can see why. I've read it, and I've really enjoyed it. But once again, a story that was built up to be this amazing show fell flat at the last hurdle. It ruined everything this show was meant to be, and I really wish they handled the ending a little bit better, and I wish they had better villains. In this world, the buildup of negative human emotions take physical form and are known as curses. A handful of humans known as Jujutsu sorcerers protect humanity by fighting these curses. Now, Jujutsu Kaisen, or JJK as it's more commonly known, is probably the most popular shonen in the world at this moment. It began its serialization in March of 2018, and it's still continuing today.
But wait, this video is about anime ending. You can't talk about a story that hasn't finished.
True, it hasn't finished, but it's almost finished, and it's my damn video, so I'll talk about what I want. Yes, JJK hasn't finished, but the story is in its final arc, with the manga author Gege Yakutami having said the manga will finish in 2024. Now, JJK is popular for all the right reasons. It has a great ensemble of characters, all with distinct personalities, and a story that's actually pretty good. And you cannot forget about the anime, which has amazing animation thanks to the animators at MAPPA. But I think the biggest thing that JJK has going for it is the meme culture around it, dubbed aptly Lobotomy Kaisen. These memes are some of the most brain-rot stuff I've ever seen. And the more I go into the community, the more I realize it's all just brain rot. No one cares about anything other than the memes and jokes. It's all Lobotomy Kaisen. This truly is our Jujutsu Kaisen. But apart from the incredible amounts of jokes made about this story, another big reason why people like JJK is because of the main villain, Sukuna. Now, this guy is just pure evil. He doesn't care who it is. He's coming to your ends and asking whether women and kids are first. Now, while Sukuna, in my opinion, isn't the most deep villain or anything, if you remember my criteria for a good villain, he checks the first box. He is definitely an antagonistic force. Not even Gojo, the strongest sorcerer in the story, can beat him. And he definitely has something resembling strong ideals. I mean, he doesn't really have any. He just wants to be the strongest, which in retrospect is kind of lazy writing. But if it works for Goku, it'll work for Sukuna. But in this case, if he wants to be the strongest, he's definitely succeeding. So we'll just leave this second point in a grey area for now. But recently in the Shinjuku arc, and by recently I mean this started in May 2023, it's been over a year, Sukuna has started to beat the hell out of everyone. He's taken out every damn person in this verse. And he has some of the craziest ass pulls I've ever seen. He might have more plot armor than the MC. In fact, I'm beginning to think he is the main character, and therein lies my problem with Sukuna. The problem is the complete opposite with Muzan. Where I thought Muzan didn't do enough, Sukuna is doing too much. It's becoming too much because for over a year, all we've been given is Sukuna fighting the main cast. I mean, there's been breaks here and there with Kenjaku, but they were few and far between. Because of this long-winded battle, we have some of the biggest exposition dumps I've ever seen since Hunter x Hunter, with pages and pages and pages of exposition. I know training arcs are boring and done to death now, but it would be nice to see some of it, and not just have it dumped on us in flashbacks with characters yapping. All of this has just brought me out of the story, and I'm just reading it out of necessity. But I no longer look forward to a new chapter. As of writing this script, I've just read chapter 264, and Yuji tried to talk no Jutsu Sukuna. What is happening to this manga? It's so annoying to see a once great story being fumbled so damn hard. Sukuna could have been a great. He could have had a seat next to some of the best villains in anime and manga, but Gege has ruined Sukuna. In my opinion, he's made Sukuna boring. The formula writes itself. Sukuna fights someone, he uses a special technique that he hasn't used since the Heian era. The character loses, then someone new comes in and the cycle starts again. This is all that's been happening for the last year. At least now it looks like Yuji has his main character pants on and is about to main character all over Sukuna. But the story had some great moments and some great characters and a great villain. It's such a damn shame that it's all coming to nothing. But some stories feel rushed at the end, the opposite is happening to JJK. It's dragging on. Like, Gege, just end it now. But back to my main issue with Sukuna. He started off as this villain, where he instantly made a great impact. I mean, the fight versus Gojo and Sukuna right at the beginning of the show just goes to show how the difference between Sukuna and Gojo. And over time, Sukuna has grown in power, especially in Shibuya arc, where we see some of the most destructive force I've ever seen in shounen manga. I mean, of course it's not planets blowing up. If you go by just body count, Frieza hasn't washed. But in terms of just seeing the amount of destruction, seeing planes fall out of the sky, skyscrapers full of people collapsing, it was a spectacle of pure evil. And Sukuna had a massive part in all of that. And he did all of this just to put Yuji into pain and suffering, more than he already has. And there's other villains who are great as well. Kenjaku is a brilliant mastermind of a villain. He wants to bring a great age of curses into modern day, and he was succeeding. The Culling Games arc was great. I mean, I think in my opinion, it was the best arc. Better than Shibuya. I mean, a lot of people might disagree with me, but in my opinion, it was amazing. And then it just ended and Kenny died. And he just died in the worst way possible. And unfortunately, what should have been a great villain just ended on a sour note. It's almost as if Gege had no idea what to do with him after the Culling Games. And it seems like the same is going for Sukuna. He has no idea what to do. He's made him too strong, and I don't know how you're meant to come back from that. I mean, there have been some strong villains in the past. I mean, look at Madara. He showed how strong he was. He dropped a damn meteorite. But in that sense, there was always something that could be done. It didn't look like the characters were in their full forms, and obviously with the Sage of Six Paths giving power to Naruto and Sasuke, they were able to defeat him. I mean, Madara's end was really bad. Probably one of the worst in all of anime. But at least he had some great moments. But Sukuna just doesn't have that. After the fight with Gojo, he lost everything that made him great. There was now nothing to him. None of the characters could even stand up to him. And in my opinion, that's not always a bad thing. If Gege wants Sukuna to win, let him win. You know, having the villains win isn't a bad thing. But it just seems like the last year has now just been wasted. Now it looks like Yuji's gonna beat Sukuna, and we're just gonna be left with another plain boring main character beats Sukuna after all of this has happened. It's such a shame. Sukuna should have been a great, and he would have been, but lazy writing and a dragged out story has just made him feel so flat and one note. And I wish Gege would have changed it. I wish he would have made Sukuna be a little less powerful. But unfortunately, the stakes are so high, Sukuna's so powerful, and it just feels like as though we're just gonna get this rinse and repeat all the way up until the end. And although JJK hasn't finished, I can already tell the ending is gonna be rubbish, and it's not gonna live up to its hype, which I am sorely disappointed about. Endings are extremely important to any story. That much is evident. But even after speaking about these stories and other popular shows, does this mean that these stories are unreadable pieces of trash? Absolutely not. These 3 stories, although having subpar endings, are not overall bad. They all have moments where the narrative and the characters shine, and there are reasons why the ending of manga are not always the best. But the biggest reason is because of where they're published. Weekly Shonen Jump is infamous for having strict deadlines and a horrible work schedule. Having to release a new chapter every week is exhausting, and when a series comes to an end or is about to end, Shonen Jump tends to give the author a deadline, and so the author is now forced to end a multi-year story earlier or faster than they were anticipating. Now, you could say, shouldn't the author plan better? Well, if you've ever written a story, you'll know that plans tend to change. The most famous example is with Goku. Goku's based off Sun Wukong and the Journey to the West. But as Toriyama was writing Dragon Ball, the story changed, and Goku is now an alien, which explains his powers. So ideas are born and old plans are changed, which sometimes works out for the best, but ultimately there are a plethora of reasons why some manga end badly. But this shouldn't take away from these great stories. Each of the manga I've talked about should be picked up and read and enjoyed. And if you did enjoy the ending, then that's fine. We all have our likes and dislikes, but we can all agree these stories are nowhere near being bad stories. Thanks for watching.